Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on the Premier shuffling her cabinet. But first, putting debate over separation on the ballot.
The proponent was very clear in his public appearances talking about winning a referendum and having a referendum on Alberta's place in Canada.
Oftentimes, it feels like the politics of the UCP is a stage play to exercise their power to do what they want.
MLAs debating a road forward Wednesday for the Forever Canadian petition. And while deliberations continued, the UCP caucus issued a news release announcing the bipartisan committee had decided Thomas Lukaszuk's question would be recommended to go forward in the October referendum. A release later retracted and the meeting adjourned without a decision. Joining us now, Thomas Lukaszuk, former Deputy Premier and lead proponent for the Forever Canadian campaign. Thomas, welcome back, sir.
Good afternoon, Michael.
Okay, before we dig into the government push to put the Forever Canadian question on the referendum, as a former politician, as we say, a former Deputy Premier, what is to be made of the UCP caucus issuing, then retracting that news release while deliberations continued?
Well, Michael, while I was presenting to this all-party committee, but dominated by UCP MLAs, sharing with them that most signatories who were signing the Forever Canadian petition, in fact, didn't want a referendum, the most common comment was, "I can't believe we even have to do this." They simply didn't understand why we would have a referendum in this province on separation. And as I'm presenting, there is a sudden turmoil among UCP staffers because it turns out that they already issued a press release with a decision to use the Forever Canadian question. But I haven't even finished presenting, and there was no vote. There was no question even asked in the committee yet. So we now know that the UCP caucus and the Premier are predetermined to have any question, as long as separatists get some kind of a question on a referendum for separating to Alberta. So, let's put this into perspective, because maybe we often don't think of it that way. But in the history of Canada, since our inception, only two premiers put a referendum forward on breaking up Canada and separating from Canada, and that was René Lévesque and Jacques Parizeau, both separatist premiers from Quebec. As of tonight, Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, will be joining the ranks. She'll be the third premier in the history of Canada to put forward a referendum on separating from Canada.
Okay, so then to the meat of the matter, why is putting your question to a referendum a problem?
Well, she just needs any question. The preferred question was the separatist question, but it is stuck in courts. That was a constitutional question that would be legally binding, except they neglected to consult with First Nations, so they can't use that question. So at this point in time, she has to have a question. And the Forever Canadian question seems to be convenient to her. But the Premier doesn't realize that she's getting herself into another problem. Separatists will not accept the Forever Canadian question because it is a policy question. It doesn't meet the Constitutional and the Clarity Act standards. It was drafted to be a policy question to be voted on in the legislature. If we were to pose this question as a constitutional question, it would be stuck in courts just like the separatist question. So separatists will not be happy with this question. And I can tell you more than 75% of Albertans and all the signatories on the Forever Canadian petition will not be happy because we don't want a referendum to begin with. So Premier, as she is trying to wiggle out of a very unenviable political position, saving her own political skin, because this is what it's really all about right now. It's about the Premier remaining the leader of the UCP party and staying as a Premier. Her strategy seems to be digging as opposed to getting herself out of that hole.
Could the Premier and Cabinet, though, not modify your question such that it clears the hurdle of being binding, being constitutional?
Well, they could modify it, but it doesn't change the fact that no matter what question they put on the referendum, they will be the proponents of a yes-no question on whether Alberta should separate from Canada. So as I said, she will be the third premier ever to put a question of this nature to a referendum. But if this is a binding question, then she has to consult with First Nations first. She can't do an end run around that. If it's a non-binding question, then separatists will not accept it because they expect a binding constitutional question. So, this is what happens when you're too cute by half, and you try to please both sides, and you don't pick a side. You have no ideological or moral compass. You end up putting yourself in this position. But I can tell you, for every Canadian, all we can do now is campaign on no matter what question it will be. So because we don't have a leaked electors list, we have to ask Albertans to voluntarily register themselves on our website, forever-canadian.ca, so that we can mount a formidable campaign against a formidable force, because it's no longer just the Separatists, but obviously the power of Alberta government. We know Washington's involved. We know they have the leaked list. This is now a real campaign.
If we go back to that UCP caucus news release, it stated your application explicitly chose a referendum as opposed to a vote in the legislature, citing multiple examples of you calling for such. Cabinet Minister Jason Nixon at that committee meeting even asked you at one point why you misled those who signed your petition. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's what desperation looks like. Look, they never cared about this petition. They wouldn't even call a committee to order. None of the UCP MLAs ever signed the petition. They were very much against this petition, but now it's a time of desperation. They will grab any lifeline that they possibly could find, even if it leads nowhere, just to have a question on a petition. So now they're trying to convince nearly 500,000 Albertans who signed this petition to avoid a binding referendum, hoping that this matter will be resolved in the legislature, wondering why do we even have to go through this process to begin with, and now they're trying to convince 500,000 Albertans that they actually wanted a referendum. No, the only person that really wants a referendum is Mr. Mitch Sylvester, and he has a right. He's a citizen. He had his own petition, and Premier Danielle Smith, because she needs to keep him happy.
If the die is cast and Albertans are to vote on a question, yours or otherwise, what do you see evolving between now and October 19th?
Well, one of the reasons why I firmly believe that this is not the time to have a referendum, if there ever is, on such critical existential issue, is because this is going to divide this province even more. This is a very volatile issue. Alberta, families don't talk to families anymore. Neighbors don't talk to neighbors, but it is also going to cause phenomenal economic damage to this province. All chambers of commerce and prominent business leaders already are saying that this is causing damage. So what we are really putting is the Premier's political future versus the future of Alberta, both socially and economically, and the future of Canada. And tonight, in her television address, we will find out which is more important to the Premier. Staying a Premier and surviving as a leader of the UCP party, and that means joining the other two separatist premiers in the history of Canada and being the third one to pose a question on separation, or doing the right thing and saying, now is not the time to have any referendum for that matter. Let's focus on Canadian unity. Let's continue negotiating in a collaborative way with Ottawa, because she's doing some good work on that front. And let's focus on Canadian unity.
All right. We'll have to leave it there as always. Appreciate your time, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that too.
Thomas Lukaszuk, former Deputy Premier, lead proponent for the Forever Canadian campaign. From the Forever Canadian question on the referendum ballot to a shuffling of the Smith cabinet, time now for tonight's politics panel. Joining us this evening, Sarah Elder, founder of the political fashion brand Madam Premier, host of the Briefing Note podcast, and a former political staffer. And Barry Morishita is a former mayor of Brooks as well, former leader of the Alberta Party. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the referendum road forward.
Putting Lukaszuk's question in, though, is not going to work well for anybody. So, the whole reason that we're doing this is so we could have a constitutional question. So I don't care what the wording is. Stay Free Alberta reaction to government MLAs recommending Thomas Lukaszuk's pro-Canada question be included on the October 19th referendum ballot. The separatist group's own petition question was quashed by the courts last week. Sarah, while this whole dialogue is built up to the Premier addressing the province this evening, first though, what's to be made? UCP caucus gaffe.
jumping the gun, issuing a news release stating the MLA committee had decided to recommend the Lukaszuk Forever Canadian question be voted on in the referendum.
That's good politics to have your materials lined up ahead of time. This isn't, I mean, that's just good staff work, in my opinion. It was an unfortunate innocent incident that it was released during the committee, obviously huge blooper, but let's get serious. And any political operative will know that this is just good political ground game, like that you have your materials lined up for the determination of what you think is going to happen. It's just about hitting the send button. So that was just unfortunate. This is not like, yeah, it is surprising and it was a scandal in the moment, but like that's not what we should be focused on. What we should be focused on is the fact that nothing is going to satisfy the people driving the separatist movement in Alberta. It doesn't matter the question. It doesn't matter the type of paper that it was written on, if it's a pencil or a pen or the ballot boxes or how this is administered or any of this. Nothing is going to resolve the desire for a percentage of the population in Alberta who has the desire to separate. We just need to accept this. I don't know why it's so hard for us to just not come to the conclusion. Nothing is going to satisfy them. So in the world in which we accept this as fact, how are we going to deal with this? This is where I want us to get.
Barry, what then do you make of the government taking the position that Lukaszuk's question should go to the referendum because that's what he wanted, not for it to go to a vote in the legislature, even accusing Lukaszuk during the committee meeting of misleading Albertans who signed his petition?
Well, they don't want to be blamed. They don't want to be blamed for courting this disastrous referendum question. I mean, they've been playing footsie with the separatists. They've been, promising who knows what behind the scenes about what they're going to give the separatists in order to satisfy that. And in order to preserve Danielle Smith's leadership, let's face facts, they're a significant force in the UCP party. As a result of all that, that's what you're seeing. They want to blame somebody else. They want to blame the courts. You see the blame on the courts. The courts don't represent. We need to change that. They're blaming the question. They're blaming everybody else except themselves. And, I hope part of what comes out of all of this stuff that's happened with the gaffe and the press release is that people see that while the kind of the myth of the politics, as Sarah alluded, that these things aren't worked out, we have to be a little bit more careful about who you elect and how you're part of the process, because you're getting all of this now, and she's fighting for her life, and she's looking for she's looking for off ramps. Thomas Lukaszuk's one, blame somebody else, and that's really UCP 101 politics right now.
Sarah, how would you rate the degree of risk the government appears to be embarking on here, even where Danielle Smith's leadership is concerned?
There is absolutely an element of risk for Danielle Smith in this, and it has been since the day that she became the leader of the UCP because of how Jason Kenney was taken out and how she was elected. I have an off-ramp for Danielle Smith and the UCP. Diversify your party. Bring people in who are more thoughtful, even about separation. They can be pro-separation, but they can be pro-thoughtful approach in what ultimately serves the best interests of all. We need political leadership in this province across the political spectrum who is willing to say, I am done with politics as usual. I am going to put my own self-interest aside, and I am going to do what's best for all Albertans, even if that means I lose my job. Wouldn't that be refreshing for a change? And I'm talking to you, Naheed Nenshi. I'm talking to you, Danielle Smith. I'm talking to you, Bracky Pancholi. I'm talking to you, Jason Nixon. I'm talking to absolutely everybody who has a hand in this, in maintaining the status quo. Nothing that is happening serves anyone watching this. It does not serve me. It does not serve Michael. It does not serve Barry. It does not even serve my dog. No one is served by what's happening in Alberta politics. And every one of us has the ability to say enough is enough, and we want better, and we demand better, and it can be better. Do we want it to be better? That's the question. I want it to be better. Do you? We can end this. Let's end this for Alberta.
Okay, so Barry, last question to you on this one then. Could the Smith government still take the off-ramp of not putting a separation debate question on the referendum, or is this just going to happen no matter what?
Well, this speaks to what Sarah just said. If the leader of the province, Danielle Smith, wants to do the right thing for Alberta, absolutely not. She doesn't put it on the ballot. There is nothing to do there. There's nothing to be gained. We've seen the economic issues. We've seen the political issues. We've seen the cultural and the shaping of what Albertans are saying to each other based on this approach to politics. So, as Sarah said, if she wants to be the leader of Alberta and she wants to do what's best for Alberta, absolutely. And she has the opportunity to remain premier, albeit, in precarious circumstances, but at least to go out in defending the rights of its citizens. So I think, she has a chance to do things right. That might bring a groundswell of support from other places for her. But there is no doubt what's going to happen if she kind of wishy-washes her way into this. She's going to get taken out. She's going to be fighting for the next 18 months, either whether she's leading the UCP in the election or whether she has a chance to win in the next election. I don't see any good things coming out of that.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break, but when we come back, the details on a shuffle of the Smith cabinet with no fewer than 6 portfolios changing hands. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. A shuffling of the Premier's cabinet today.
Your Honour, I will now call forward the Honourable Jason John Nixon to take the oath as President of Treasury Board and Minister of Finance.
Swearing-in ceremonies in Calgary this morning with the Premier announcing a number of cabinet portfolio changes. The shuffle follows cabinet resignation announcements Wednesday involving Finance Minister Nate Horner and Health and Surgical Health Services Minister Matt Jones. Both have reaffirmed their support for the party and will continue serving as MLAs, but will not seek re-election. If we take a quick look at who's going where, as we saw, Jason Nixon, now Minister of Finance. R.J. Sigurdsson moves from agriculture to affordability and utilities, while Tara Sawyer takes his former role. Nathan Neudorf takes on assisted living and social services. Adriana LaGrange takes hospital and surgical services, and Justin Wright is added to the health portfolio with primary and preventative services. Quite the shuffle there, Barry. This and it's more than just replacing 2 ministers. It involves something like a quarter of the cabinet. What do you see the Premier signaling with this shuffle?
Well, I think she's trying to assemble a team that's going to be at her beck and call going into the next election. As we just discussed, the messaging going on, it has to be very tight for her to have any chance of surviving. And so I think this group allows that. I think it's really interesting to note that both Minister Horner and the other ministers certainly were saying things that we haven't heard anybody in the UCP caucus or certainly cabinet say, that the UCP is a pro-Canada party and that they should be building a strong Alberta within Canada, but not until they had resigned from cabinet. And I think that's a telling feature of what this group probably brings. None of those are going to be ones that are going to speak that confidently about their view of Canada, that's for sure.
Sarah, surprised to see Nate Horner, Matt Jones pulling the pin on their cabinet portfolios? We're still a long ways off from the next general election.
I don't think it's surprising at all. I think we're going to see more of these, and unlike a lot of people on X yesterday, this is a nothing burger. This is just people saying, like, I want to move on from politics, and it's just the timing of it all just was a kind of a dumpster fire yesterday in terms of like news on top of news. I don't think that this is anything special, and it is very common for people who are in politics to maybe feel more comfortable saying things that they wouldn't have said. They could also speak without, fear of breaching cabinet confidentiality or different things, right? Like, they can breathe a little bit easier in terms of not being restricted as to what they say because they have to follow what the government is saying. That is just how our parliamentary system works. That's not a conspiracy. This is all just kind of, I think, lifting the veil on how internal party politics works and the machinations of politics, like having a news release drafted before a decision is made. You know, it's just a matter of when you hit send. That is something that everyone does. Politicians of all political stripes feel more comfortable saying something when they're on their way out the door. You know, it's just because of all of the things going on right now, it seems like there's something to it. But I really just think that this is politics.
Okay, so Barry, what's then to be said about Jason Nixon being elevated to the role of finance minister? How does that fit with the premier's approach to governance?
Well, I think Jason is from the last government. He was Jason Kenney's finance minister for a short time, and it's interesting to note that he was kind of relegated when Danielle Smith first took over. So it's again trying to consolidate her authority, maybe her control of the party, at least at the MLA and the caucus level. Jason represents has been there for a long time. He certainly has a lot of influence within that group. So I think that's Smith probably just trying to consolidate that, trying to shore up things before for the next 18 months.
All right, one more quick topic, and that's polling on the Smith government's approach to redrawing electoral maps.
We saw a very strong majority of Albertans saying that electoral boundary changes should be made by an independent commission and not by elected officials. And that crossed partisan boundaries too, which you often don't see in public opinion research.
The government voted last month to scrap boundary change recommendations from an independent panel and instead strike a UCP-led committee to come up with new maps. The opposition claims it's a move to rig ridings to the government's benefit. The Probe research poll results also showing more than 2/3 of Albertans agree boundaries for urban riding should stay within city limits. Sarah, the polling found 68% of respondents agreed the process should be independent. 66% of that UCP supporters. Surprised by that degree of engagement?
No. But here is what maybe the election in 2027 will actually be about, and that is, do you agree with Alberta separating from Canada? This could just end up being like a referendum question and turns into an election question. The UCP could do the craziest things with the with the electoral boundaries. If this ends up being an election in 2027 or before, who knows? And I'm not saying I know anything I don't. I'm just hedging in case because, like spaghetti and meatballs could start falling from the sky. And I think everyone would be like, yeah, this is totally normal right now. This is such an existential issue. The UCP needs to ask itself, is this what you want to be the thing that takes you down? Like ward boundaries, none of this stuff really matters. Even Adriana LaGrange, like MH Care, anyone, and now she's the minister again of like seemingly all things health. Like there's just so much. But so again, I just want to end by saying the UCP has an off-ramp. It is simply saying we're going to diversify our party. We're going to bring more people in. The Separatists, you've had your say. We're done listening. We've listened. We've done the best we can. You can vote however you want, but we're going to govern for all Albertans. Again, wouldn't that be nice?
Barry, last 30 seconds to you. What kind of pressure does polling like this now put on the government?
Well, again, I think it becomes an issue. This is a trust issue. We're going down a road where people think they know what the right things are, but then they still vote for a government that does that. There's a certainly disconnect. But what's happening, I think, is that there are going to be groups that coalesce around these pieces, the referendum, the approach to separation, the way the boundaries are going to be. And it's going to chew away at that center support that the UCP needs to form the government. And I think the other thing that has to be mentioned is that the NDP has to start taking advantage of that chunk and presenting themselves in a different light. Because when we look at it, Danielle Smith still seems to be riding the polls high enough to win again.
All right, we're clean out of time. Have to leave it there. Thank you both.
Thanks, Barry, Michael.
That is our program for tonight. And a reminder, you can always have a say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, from another hospital waiting room death to guardrails on the move to a dual practice healthcare system. We'll hear from the president of the Alberta Medical Association on Friday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching. Join us again next time.